Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, good afternoon and welcome to the 16th Street Baptist Church. On behalf of Reverend Arthur Price Jr., the pastor of this church, I want to thank you for coming to this forum today, Wounded Places, a panel discussion on post-traumatic stress disorder in children. What we want to do today is we want to raise awareness of this issue that many children in our community face. Oftentimes it goes undiagnosed, untreated, and it's up to us to do something for our children. I was reminded this morning when I woke up and I was thinking about PTSD, and I was reminded of Boys in the Hood. That was this movie, Boys in the Hood, John Singleton, Boys in the Hood. I don't know if y'all remember that. There was a scene in Boys in the Hood. There was these little young boys, and there was this dead body that was behind this fence, and these little young boys said, hey, there's a dead body. So he grabbed their little friends and they ran behind the fence to show these other friends this dead body. And it was just a way of life. You know, they were laughing and joking about this dead body. This guy was laying back there already, rigor mortis had already set in this body. And those other guys who had committed the murder ran them off, and I thought about that. And for many children in our community, that is a way of life. Think about the children in our community that are growing up in battered homes or being battered themselves in those environments, and have nowhere to turn, no one to go to, and nothing's being done. So we're trying to do something about it. I work at the Jefferson County Department of Health, and I'm a part of a group, Mental Health Goal Group, and we have been working for the past 4 years to try to raise awareness of mental health in this community. We created a mental health resource directory. You can find that directory at alabamamentalhealth.org. If you don't mind, you can write that down. It's at alabamamentalhealth.org. If you go and Google it, you can put in your resources, or you can identify other resources in this community. If you know of resources that are not there, just go to it again. It's www.alabamamentalhealth.org. Join it. Be a part of what we're doing. Be a part of this movement. We're losing too many children. Somebody talked about this prison, school-to-prison pipeline. It's real. It is real. We are losing too many of our babies to prison. When they come out, they're not rehabilitated. No. They are not rehabilitated. And I was talking to a police officer, and we were talking about recidivism, and they said, well, the recidivism rate, and that is a rate that a person go back into prison once they leave, is like 75%. So that means that within 6 months or so, once a person get out of prison, they go back in. So does that mean that a person has been rehabilitated, that they find their way back into prison? Or when I go and seek employment, that I have to check a box and indicate that I have been incarcerated at some point in my life, and guess what happens to my application? It's automatically trashed. So we have to do something about man's inhumanity to man. So we want to talk about these things today. We have a very, very, very strong panel of experts here today, and we're going to really raise the bar, raise the conversation, and we're going to have a great time. Somebody told me, have fun. First of all, they told me to make money in life. Make money, have fun, learn something. And that's what I've always tried to do. Make money, have fun, learn something. I want you guys to learn something today. I can't give you any money because I don't have any. And I told them I didn't have any money either. I told them right off, I don't have the money. I just want you to come. I told them that. So again, we're going to have a great time. We're going to learn something. This is not an easy subject to talk about. But we're going to talk about it today. I have with me today, and Dr. Nelson will come up and kind of introduce the panel, but I have Dr. Artie Nelson. Raise your hand. Dr. Artie Nelson is with me today. Dr. Geraldine Agee, where you at, Dr. Agee? Let's give him a round of applause. She's with me today. Reverend Carmen McCain is with me today. Thank you, Reverend McCain, for coming. Dr. Dan Murillo is here with me today. He's over there. And Lois Lambert is also with me today. Lois, thank you so much for coming. They took time out of their busy Saturday to come out here this evening to talk to us about an issue because they felt that it was important that we talk about this today. And it is. So Dr. Nelson, would you please come forward?
Thank you. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Doing good. So we're competing against the football games, I guess. What I want to do is, I'm Artie Nelson. I'm a child adolescent psychiatrist, and I want this to be an informal discussion. This is for the community, so just don't think that the experts are here and we know everything, and we got to really have it as a discussion because it is a very important topic. So I'm going to introduce the panel and have them sort of come up and tell. I guess these mics are open up here. What they do, and Greg had told me you got 8 to 10 minutes, so I'm going to try to keep you on task as far as just introducing yourself and telling what you do. So the first person is Dr. Jacqueline Agee. She's a Geraldine, I'm sorry. And she is a professor of psychology and author, and she can tell you a little bit more about what she does.
Is it okay if I stand?
Sure.
Because I don't know about me in the skirt in this chair. So it's such a pleasure to be here. Like Dr. Nelson said, thank you, Dr. Nelson, for having me be a part of the panel, and thank you, George, for inviting me. He called me Jacqueline, which is great. I'm used to that. My sister's name is actually Jacqueline, so I go by Jacqueline. And so I just want to talk a little bit about why this is really relevant for me. By introducing my background. So I'm an adjunct faculty member in psychology at UAB, taught at Miles College. I was for 8 or 9 years at UC Berkeley, and there I worked with some of the world's brightest people on some of their darkest days. I worked in the counseling center as well as the Center for Workforce Development, and I taught in the psychology program there. I have a doctorate in psychology, so I have a clinical psychology background. And for 4 years, while I was at JCCO, I was the coordinator of 2 substance abuse programs and 1 prevention program that was one of the best in the States. One of my staff members is here right now, LaVey Law. And but a lot of those things that I've done academically, I was telling other panelists that when I came from my doctoral program, my research was on stress and coping of African American physicians in a level 1 trauma center in California. Dr. Nelson was talking about King Drew. My husband was a resident in, it was at UCSF Fresno, and they brought everybody from south of Bakersfield, north to Barstow, that had been shot or anything like that to this emergency room. So in 1 year, in a 3-year family practice program, they were supposed to deliver 4 or 5, 4 boys and 4 girls in order to graduate, and they were delivering something like that every 2 or 3 months. I mean, the volume was insane, but I was really interested in looking at how they dealt with the situations that they were faced with experiencing that trauma. And what we do know is that many counselors, do we have any counselors that are here or people that work in this area or work in this field? By show of hands, anybody that works with young people or people that are right? And so we do know that we can have vicarious trauma, that we can experience these things by hearing about them and by living with them and helping people to try to resolve these problems. And so my research was about how did these physicians deal with the trauma that they saw and vicariously experienced every day. But what makes me the most qualified above all of those things to be a part of this panel is because for many of the things that were mentioned in the video, I experienced myself. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. And I grew up on the west side of Dayton, and that would be the equivalent probably to a smaller version of maybe like a Cabrini Green in Chicago. High poverty, high crime, violence was a way of life. There were a lot of things that were in that video that were described. That was the way that I grew up. And when I was at UC Berkeley, our chair at the time was Dr. Stephen Henshaw, who does a lot of stuff with NSF, National Institute of Health. At one point, he was the director looking at ADHD and all these kind of things. But he's also interested in stigmas associated with categorizing people as having mental illnesses. And so I was part of a book that he wrote, and that book is called Breaking the Silence. And in each one of the chapters of the book was a mental health professional who talked about someone in their lives or in their family, not somebody they heard about, not somebody they served, or not somebody that they got to know over time, but somebody that they grew up with or was part of their family who had suffered from a mental illness. And in that book, I wrote about my own mother. And the title of the chapter that I wrote in that book is called Weeping Mother. And when I was working at Cal State University, Fresno, in the counseling center, we had a woman that came in to, because she was depressed and she had a newborn, and she was obviously suffering from the, what is it called when you have a newborn and you're depressed?
Postpartum depression.
Postpartum. I'm thinking post-traumatic because we're standing here, but postpartum depression. But she had a Hispanic background, and they called it weeping mother. There's a term for that. And so I had to talk to her from that perspective. And she talked a lot about, just her depression and dealing with her young son. And she was depressed to the point where I had to get my advisor involved. We had to develop a plan for her to stabilize herself and to protect the child. And we did that within a matter of hours. Got her support and assistance, got her husband on the phone, got her sisters, came up with an emergency plan. And I recognized in that minute in grad school that my mother never had an emergency plan. She never had an assessment team. She never had a critical incident team to help her to deal with some of the trauma that she faced on a daily basis. And so in that essay, Weeping Mother, I talked about growing up and just thinking of violence as normal, thinking of people hollering down the street, calling each other out of their names as normal, thinking of gunshots as normal. Even though we lived in a neighborhood, my first place that I grew up was called Parkside, and it was a housing project, which they don't call them that anymore. But when we grew up in Parkside, my mother moved us to a home, and it was supposed to be a better life. But where we lived in Madden Hills was anchored by the projects to the north, which was called Hilltop, and then the projects to the west, which was called DeSoto Bass. And so we were almost like kind of sitting ducks for a lot of things that were going on. So we hadn't really escaped it. We were just one block over, but totally immersed in that culture. And so I'm really interested in hearing the other panelists and your feedback about the film and the things that we know to be true. And Greg mentioned at the beginning about the movie Boys in the Hood. And I remember a scene where they said either they don't show, don't know, or don't care about the Boys in the Hood. So I'm so glad that the faithful are here, because we do really care about those people in our communities and these other communities who are affected by trauma. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Reverend Carmen McCain. She's a senior pastor at House of Praise Church and founder of Mothers Against Violence.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today. Can you hear me back there? It is indeed a pleasure to be here today. I feel that I'm amongst some of the greatest. We had an opportunity here to really talk. My very distinguished colleagues here, we had an opportunity to talk. I really enjoyed that. So I think that today, because we are among, and I am here among, some of the most polished educators you will hear from their clinical experience. I think that, I guess, with just knowing what I know and have heard from them, I feel like I'm the one that work in the trenches. And if anything qualifies me to be here today, it's that. Working in the trenches alongside of people that are being put in body bags, seeing the parents that have to walk down the aisles of the churches behind the caskets, the children that are left traumatized, sitting in schools where we frequent all the time, can't learn because they're hungry, can't learn because they have to go back to home where they have no lights, there's no gas, they're cold, they're traumatized. There used to be a time we didn't hear of post-traumatic stress in children. We heard of that, but we associated that term with people that had gone to the military. First and foremost, we thought of them coming back, and we coined a phrase called shell-shocked. Our children are now shell-shocked. And they didn't just get that way overnight. Through the years, I have watched this. I am a Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree student, graduate of UAB. I'm a pastor of House of Praise Church. I'm a mother of a son and daughter who's left behind because God blessed me with 3 children, and one of them, my 16-year-old son, Nezariah Ramon McCain, better known as Bunky, was shot and killed in a drive-by shooting at the Irondale Pizza Hut one Friday night, October 30th of 1992, just after a football game at Shays Valley High School. Honor student, loved God more than he loved anything else in the whole world. Had just gone to the Pizza Hut to celebrate with his team for a victory where they had just become number 1, going to the states playoffs. He never made it because there were 4 young men in a car that night that something would not allow those young men to know that we're just teenage boys and we should be having fun. That one thing that let them know that was a .38 caliber revolver that they had in their possession. And what took me 9 months to bring my precious son into the world only took 20 seconds to take my baby out, where they encircled the parking lot of the Pizza Hut, shot into a crowd where they were celebrating their victory, put a bullet inside of my baby's heart, hit the largest artery of his body, his aorta. He could only live 20 seconds after that. Holding another young person's hand, a young man that finally said, "What's wrong, Mikey?" After he asked everybody else, "Are you okay?" Mikey was saying, "Are you okay, man? Are you okay, Jesse? Are you okay? Are you okay, Ronnie? Are you okay, Ronald? Are you okay?" And finally they noticed that as he was saying, "You okay?" he was doing this with his hand down inside of his little hoodie. And the one thing that transpired with that is that he looked at the young man and he said, "Man, I think I've been hit." Upon saying that, the young man grabbed him and just kind of pulled him back to the curb and got down with him. And the one thing this baby said was, "God, take care of my mother. Take care of my mother." And as he said that, he was squeezing. I guess you wonder why I've been squeezing his hand. but he was squeezing his hand, and all of a sudden, he let it go. God heard that baby's prayer. God has been taking care of his mother. Since 1992, I've not walked, not 1 second, in my own strength. I've been carried. I feel that I'm an expert to be on this panel today, not because I have the answers, but because maybe I can just move you to give me some that will help me with one of the prisoners where we frequent with and dealing with over 30,000 inmates. I will be in 2 prisons on tomorrow. We have prison ministry. We go to all of the prisons. We frequent the prisons over the country. But Alabama by itself has over 30,000 inmates. And in dealing with them, and I mean male and female, you would be surprised at what we hear as being the effects of them being there. And we hear people say, oh, they put themselves there, they deserve to be there. And so they walk off and leave them there, never knowing who's there until it knocks at your door. But when it knocks at your door, it's different. Every Christmas, we take gallon Ziploc bags with soap, deodorant, toothpaste, washcloth, anything we can fill that bag with, and we take it around to the prisons and put it inside of their hands. And you should see some of the biggest ones that have tattoos from the face all the way down to the head, big motorcycle riders that step up, and when they get that little bag, they break down little babies. And they cry. And we walk out from them many times not knowing. All they need is someone to just talk to, find out. Most of the times you'll hear stories like what you saw today. I asked my daddy to take care of me, but he couldn't. Why couldn't daddy take care of him? We hear stories that you wouldn't believe that traumatize these young men. Post-traumatic stress syndrome? Yes. Disorder? Yes. Chaos? Yes. Registered nurse, pastor, mother, prison minister, community leader, activist, wonderful topics, wonderful titles, but most of all, mother.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next panelist is Lois Lambert. She is a licensed professional counselor at Gateway Child and Family Services.
Good afternoon. It is great to be here today. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and what I do, and hopefully we'll be able to take your questions and come up with some ways that we might work in the community to affect the kids and adolescents. So I have a master's in clinical psychology. I received that from Pepperdine University in California. I'm licensed as a professional counselor, and I have been working with children, adolescents, and their families for over 20 years now. I have specialized in treating kids who have gone through trauma, many of whom have been abused, come from neglected homes. I had the opportunity when I was in North Alabama to develop and implement a day treatment program for children who were seriously emotionally disturbed, and that was typically secondary to being in homes where there was violence, where there was abuse, where there was neglect. I continued working in an outpatient setting, providing individual and family therapy, again, for kids who were coming from homes where there was a lot of abuse and neglect. The movie didn't go over that very much, but we didn't watch the whole movie. We just got a clip of it. Currently, I am working with Gateway Family Services. I'm a therapist there, and I work both with children who are in our therapeutic foster care program, as well as kids who are just coming in from the community. And so there's a variety of issues that they come in for. What I've noticed with so many of the kids who come in, who I see in the community, in the schools, they become labeled as bad kids, much as what they were showing on the film. And they're seen only for their behaviors, and no one's looking behind the behaviors to see what's driving them. And so as long as we're trying to just treat the behavior, the way that happens is we get into punishment. We get into expelling kids. We end up sending them by way of the juvenile detention facility. And a good part of that is because we're not looking beyond the behavior. With a lot of the kids who I work with, have them come in, and so many have anger issues. And whenever we start talking about things and looking at them, what's going on is pretty much the hyperarousal, the hypervigilance, what they've been exposed to. Now they're constantly in that fight or flight state where the slightest thing puts them in a state where they want to react, and a lot of times it looks angrily, but quite frequently it is a defensive mechanism that they're using to survive. So with the teenagers who I work with, we're able to talk through some things, provide some education so that they know the effects of trauma on their lives, and as they're able to see how some of their behaviors now came from what they've gone through, then they're able to start going through a process of change. With the little children, I work with kids as young as 3 and 4 years of age, all the way up to 18-year-olds. And with the very young children, whenever they're coming in, the ones who I'm seeing who are in therapeutic foster care, for example, who've been in homes where there was domestic violence, where there was excessive use of drugs, violence, sometimes gangs. These very little ones, the way it looks with them is in their play. You see them reenacting violent scenes, and you see them, you know, there's a disconnect, much as they were saying in the movie, between their memories of what's happened. They can't convey to you verbally what happened to them. So what do? They show it in their play. So you start seeing these things occurring over and over. You see through their play what the emotions are, things that they can't articulate, and it starts repeating over and over. So as a clinician, what I'm able to do is to kind of interrupt those themes where they're stuck, replaying it. We're able to start connecting the memories that this is what you experienced, and that's why you're playing this out, and that's what it's looking like whenever you're at preschool and you're hitting these other kids. And then we're able to move beyond that, and it's almost a magical process where through the play I'm able with some of the other toy characters to actually intervene and help the kids develop new ways of coping with the problems that they've gone through. And we have adventures, as we call them. So during that process, they're learning what is normal, that what they thought was normal, the life of violence, etc., that's not the way it is, that We don't have to have our play characters fighting all the time. We can go on adventures and go have fun. So I really enjoy what I do. I feel like I'm blessed to have the opportunity to work with them. And I feel like through the work that I do that I'm able to make a difference. And whenever we can get families who will participate in this, so much more change comes about. So I think what we're doing now, we're at a starting place where we're doing some education, and from that, I think that'll allow us to move forward in the community, because the more others are aware that what they're seeing is the effects of trauma, the more they'll be able to understand. And I think with understanding, with empathy, that our response to others will be different, and maybe we won't be so inclined to punish, to expel, that instead we'll intervene and provide them what they need in order to go forward in life.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Dan Murillo, PhD. He's a clinical psychologist at Children's Hospital of Alabama.
Thank you. I'm just glad I didn't have to go after, well, I went after all three of these, so it's a tough act to follow. So I'm a little bit traumatized myself. As Dr. Nelson said, I'm a psychologist, and I work at Children's of Alabama, specifically in children's behavioral health at the Ireland Center. We have a new name. I have a really unique job. My bosses, for some reason, let me do pretty much whatever I want to do, which is pretty good. They don't know what I do. They just sort of let me go out and do stuff. And because of that, I see a lot of kids. I do primarily evaluations. I don't really do treatment. I send them to Lois, thankfully. But I go out into the hospital. I have patients come to see me with different problems, usually referred by by physicians. I'm a neuropsychologist, so I deal with the brain and all that. So I see a lot of kids from neurology, with kids with epilepsy and things like that. But the thing I really like to do, it's really kind of exciting to me, which may sound strange, is I like to go into the hospital. I do a lot of consults and do a lot of work with the different medical teams. And I've become the expert, and that's kind of a dubious honor. I've become the expert on this category of disorders called somatic disorders. You ever heard of those? Yes. Somatic disorders? That's when folks are having very real, sometimes very dramatic physical symptoms, but there's no medical basis to them. You know, we do the big studies and MRIs many times over and blood tests and all that, and there's nothing from a medical standpoint that's causing these problems. And when we really get into it, a lot of times we find that there are lots of emotional issues that are going on. Trauma is one of the big things. You got to look for trauma, because that's such a high occurrence when folks are developing very real physical symptoms. But other things too. One of the things that you learn when you work in the field is that trauma is sort of self-defined. Okay? Now, with the video, we see living in poverty, living in where there's a lot of violence going on. Those are very obvious stressors. But trauma is that, certainly, but there's also other kinds of trauma as well. There's illness, having illness, a chronic illness in the family, or, you know, mom and dad fighting, you know, and divorce. You know, the video again alluded to living with a parent who has mental illness or substance abuse issues. So there's lots of different things that can be traumatic to children. And sometimes the trauma isn't necessarily these big things. You know, it could be smaller things too. Because again, trauma is how you define it. And so our kids really do live in a world where there's a lot of stressors, a lot of traumatic effects. And it can come out in many and various ways. The video talks about post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's an important topic. But we can't ignore that there's also anxiety and depression. Sometimes children who are going through a lot of issues of whatever type have a lot of attention problems. Lois kind of alluded to that. Have a lot of school problems. One of the things that drives me crazy as a psychologist, particularly since I do evaluations, is children are sent to me and they're having trouble in school and they've been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. They're on medication, been on medication for years, and they're not getting better. And we take a look at that and we really have to understand, well, what's driving the behavior? Again, the panel has already talked about that. Sometimes ADHD is attention deficit is attention deficit, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's, you know, family going through a tough time. Not necessarily poverty, but maybe mom or dad lost their job and money's tight, or folks are fighting in the family, that kind of thing. So it could be lots of different things. One of the things I really enjoy about my job is that I work with students of different types. I work a lot with graduate students, predoctoral students in psychology, and predoctoral interns, folks who are pretty much almost finished with their training. They're going through the trauma dissertation usually. We talked about dissertation trauma earlier. But they're in the last stages of their training. And so really exposing them and helping them understand in a real way, and working with families in the hospital, it really brings home some of the things that they've been trained, and you really get to see, well, what happens. Lois talks about, you know, it's a privilege working with these families, and it is, but it's very difficult.
Yes.
And so helping our young professionals understand this. Working with our medical colleagues, understand, because there's a lot of misconceptions about psychological illness, mental illness. And, you know, again, one of the things that drives me crazy, and there's a lot of things that drive me crazy, but one of them is that we got this weird dichotomy between our bodies and our minds. You know, they're not separate. Okay, what happens to us emotionally affects us physically and vice versa. So really working with our medical colleagues to understand that. And we all sort of have this, oh, yeah. We understand. Physical symptoms are real. They're doing the emotional stuff, but that's not real illness. Well, it is real illness. But most importantly, I think the people that we work with and we teach, because I see clinical work as teaching, are all of you, as family members, as community members, as teachers, you know, as anybody who works with children or in any capacity, is really understanding that this behavior that we see is a language, and it tells us something. And we got to ask the next questions. It's not just enough to say that this child is acting out, or this child is inattentive, or, you know, whatever. We got to ask the next question, and that's why. What's driving this? Again, sometimes it's simple ADHD, but sometimes it's a broader issue. And that's our challenge. And I want to throw this out too, but then I'll sit down, because I've been dying to do this to some group, and you guys might test case. Okay. What kills more children in our society? Is it cancer? Is it diabetes? Or is it suicide? What's your answer? Suicide. Number 3 killer of kids, 12 to 24. You know what number 2 is? Homicide. Homicide is in the top 10 of killers of kids going down to infancy. Okay, so think about that. The number 1 killer, by the way, is accidents. Accidents. So the top 3 categories, the top 3 issues or reasons why our children die is not cancer, or any other medical issue. They're behavioral issues or societal issues, things that we can actually do something about. Okay? We don't have to have a lot, billions of dollars to put into cancer research to have an effect. There's things that we can do just as individuals to make that better. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you. So that is our panel, and we want to kick this off as a community discussion. Since I'm the moderator, I can kind of go where I want to go. And we did hand out some cards you can put questions on, so if you're somewhat shy, like Ms. Bird-Giles there, you jump right up to the mic. But before she starts, I want to throw out a question myself and give you just a brief. I'm not going to get into, because again, I want this to be something that we can talk about, and not in the psychological jargon, but just really down to earth to talk about some of this, because I think everybody's an expert on this. Important part of the film was asking, the importance of asking children what happened to them as opposed to what is wrong with them. So I wanted to throw that out to the panel of how do you go about that, and how do you get that out of kids that you see, prisoners, whoever, that are going through trauma. So I'm going to throw that out, and you don't have to, any order. We can go from there.
I'd love to address that. I think one of the most critical things in understanding where young people are, understanding their own experience, is really reacting to them and respecting them as an expert on their own experiences, as opposed to us telling them what they should know, what they should feel, what normal should be for them. We have to first understand them from where they are, what's important to them, what matters to them, and what has the biggest impact on them. So I think that that's the most important thing, to understand them from where they are.
Thank you.
Another
Next.
thing is, excuse me, they don't realize that anything is wrong with them sometimes. And at other times when they do realize that something is wrong, they don't know what. But in you talking with them and allowing them, as Dr. Agee said, to just being respectful of them, to say what happened to you, they can share when they go all the way back sometimes to childhood. Well, I remember when I was a little child, this happened, and I remember this. And then it helps them to literally answer that question for themselves. I see light bulbs come on a lot of times when they'll say, you know what, that's when I first started experiencing this. When that happened, they answer their own questions.
Okay, thank you.
I'm in the process of being certified as a trauma-focused child behavioral therapist. And as I'm going through this, one of the things that we're doing to get a measurement of progress using this model is right at the outset of treatment, we go through a questionnaire. And I have found that as I've gone through this, it asks about, have you gone through natural disasters? Have you witnessed anybody die in front of you? Have you been exposed to gun violence, etc.? And so it is asking all of the questions, any kind of trauma you can imagine. And I have found that through that additional traumas have come up more than what had been previously reported, because a lot of times these other types of trauma aren't even asked about. So I think being really direct about it at times is very helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I find that as a person who does evaluations, I ask. Just like Lois is saying, and all the rest, you got to ask the question. And I think part of the message to families is that it's okay to ask, and it's okay to bring these things up. One of the things that happens with trauma in particular is that nobody wants to talk about it. And so children get a message that we shouldn't talk about this.
That's right.
We have to keep this quiet. And then that sort of perpetuates this whole cult of silence. And so I'm always tickled when I do consults and I go back to the medical team and they say, oh, we didn't get anything. You start telling them about all the trauma that's going on and this and that, and they go like, how did you get that? And I'm a bit of a smart ass, so I say like, well, I asked, so you got to ask. Now, how you ask obviously is going to vary depending on the age of the child.
Right.
Play techniques, for example, are very helpful with smaller children. Teenagers not going to tell you much anyway. They just kind of stare at you. But again, looking at behavior, to me, that's a big clue.
Honey, can I
Dr. Agee?
say something in
Yes.
reference to asking? My husband is a team physician. He used to work with NFL Europe, and we were in Europe one year. I want to say we were in Germany, and I would go with him every year, and the league knew of my background, but they didn't necessarily use me for anything. I just happened to be there. And one day they called the room, and they told Bob, they said, we need your wife. And I thought, oh, I got to babysit somebody, okay. They said, yeah, kind of. And they got us in a car with this humongous bodyguard, and they took us from where we were in Germany to Amsterdam, where a player, one of the NFL players, had been exhibiting all of these symptoms, and they couldn't figure it out. The trainers that were there, although they were trained in dealing with the bones and the joints, they weren't trained in mental health, and so they, or whatever this was, they didn't know at the time. And he had been with doctors there in Amsterdam for several days, and they were trying to figure out what they needed to do to stabilize him to get him on a ride to Frankfurt and a flight back to the United States. And so they brought me in, and they thought, could I just sit with him while they try to figure these things out? And so I go in, they told me all the symptoms, everything that was going on, and Bob is consulting with the doctors, the translator, all this kind of stuff. So I walk over to the guy, and I go, hey, I don't know what's going on, but the last time that this happened to you, where were you and what did they do? He was like, okay, well, my anxiety medication is back in the United States. I was like, oh, okay. So I came out to Bob, he's off his meds. And so just by asking him, but he was too afraid to tell anybody else, and they were making a big thing about it, and it snowballed into this whole thing, and he didn't want the league to know back home. But it really was a matter of him needing to be back on his medication to stabilize him. And he went on to have a successful career. But that was just a matter of asking and finding out what's actually going on with them instead of assuming. Something else.
Yeah, and it's important to listen. And I think that's a message that we have to hear tonight, that it is very important to listen, and a lot of times we don't. And speaking of listening, I guess we'll have to have Ms.
Tina.
Britt Giles come up with a
Thank you.
question.
Hello, everyone. We deal mostly with adults in our clinic. I run a adult primary health clinic, and my staff, the clinical staff, is begging us to find some way to help our patients to decompress before they come back into the treatment area. And so we've teamed with a group at UAB to have some interventions in the waiting room before they see the clinical staff. And a lot of people are already on medications and things because they're on Medicaid, and they're referred to us by their mental health providers, and so they are getting treatment. But I was really impressed with the mother who knew right away and felt comfortable to go to her family stabilization coordinator. How do we get to that? We're in a blighted community, and we would love, we have a holistic health model, and we would love to be that entity. Now, we have started a number of art and photography projects going on in the community. I'm in the Inslee area. Because of blight and rebuilding, we've come across different research that says that art is helpful and things of that nature. And even a walkthrough that we're having with two people who I've known for a very, very long time. They both had relatives that were killed near where the office is. And so one of the individuals suggested that we have something called Art on the Block, and then our next Art on the Block, that we give people an opportunity to come and express about the loved ones that they've lost. And so that's one thing that we're looking at doing to bring the community back in. But it's so hard, and you've made me think of that the people that I'll contact and I'll say, well, hey, you're from this community, why don't you come back and help us with the rebuilding process? And they don't want to have anything to do with the community. And I was sitting here also thinking, when you were showing East Oakland, my relatives lived in the part that the top 5 would want to go and live, but we'd have to get BART. And for some reason, I don't remember why we were at the particular station in East Oakland, but I remember the smell of urine from when I was about 10 years old, and now I'm 46. So people who live in that kind of situation, if I remember having to stop one time in that community and thinking, ooh, seeing a film, and it gave me chills to think about that transition and that kind of shock. Not just the smell of urine, but just there were a lot of different odors and smells, but I still remember it very distinctly. And people who live in that situation for a long time, and that may be why I can't get people to come back to the community, because they were traumatized. And then others who want to help, but they're not quite sure how to help. And then our patients who are just trying to hold on. And we're sitting there trying to say, okay, well, you need to take your medication. Now, you need to lose some weight. So why aren't you walking? Why aren't you, doing all this stuff? But it's hard to expect people to do certain things when they're going back into the situation that you described as, it's not post-traumatic, it's current, and they bring their children sometimes into the clinic. So we're trying to find, I'm telling people they want to partner with us, then I can't just treat the patient, because I usually roll with 3 or 4 people coming in, because they're trying to they got one car, everybody's trying to take everybody to their appointments and things. So 1, I'm asking for help, if you can come to our clinic and help us in some way. 2, for suggestions. And 3, if this is just the beginning of the conversation, we'd love to have an additional conversation, and Greg knows exactly where we are, and we'd love to communicate with the people in the room.
Thank you, Bettina.
Now, was that a question? I'm just trying to be the moderator here.
One of her questions.
I feel like I'm being abused by the moderator.
One of her questions had to do with family stabilization, and I don't know which of us mentioned that, but in the scenario that I mentioned with the young woman that came in who had postpartum depression, she came in because she wanted a letter because she was going to miss final exams. So sometimes people come to us and they have a secondary gain. They didn't come for help. They came for you to resolve this problem, and then you go down the rabbit hole and you find out what help that they might need. And so oftentimes that's how we end up getting referred or coming in for help. And Bettina, I look forward to helping you, so I'm going to come out and check y'all out. So I just learned about your program through the CHIA program that we're both involved with. So I'll look forward to connecting with you.
Any other comments related to her question?
Another one of your questions, as I understood it, was that you needed help. You were asking for help, for volunteers to sort of to calm down, to decompress was your word, the patients before they came back to the treatment area. Prayer works.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that?
The art is great. Carry on with that. Expand on it in all the ways that you can, and you might want to try to incorporate some music too. That's real helpful.
I used to color when I had a 9 to 5, and that coloring helped me to be more relaxed and not holler at people and all that kind of stuff. So I can't say the word right, mandalas, and now I just started doing this other thing called Zen tangos, which are amazingly focused.
You can also get, sorry. I was going to say, you can get some bubble solution. No matter what, you can be angry as all get out. You can be so sad. You start blowing those bubbles and they are magic, I'm telling you.
Okay.
Well, I can't just drop this because I feel like I just got to say this again. Prayer works. Okay, let me say why. I just buried my brother. And while we were there waiting for him to expire, we had family all in one little room. Everybody's emotions were high. They were going one way or another. And I'm sitting there, and I'm the only one there that's trying to hold it together with prayer. Not outside, just praying inside. And the hospital's chaplain came inside of the room and actually asked us if we would I mean, she literally spoke my heart. With all of these emotions flying high, we had young family members that were just screaming and at each other and saying ugly things. But when this chaplain walked in and we joined hands and began to pray, I actually looked over at some of the young people that were there that were exhibiting this behavior, and I said, now you pray. As they began to pray, their hearts began, you can see it, to melt. And love was exhibited in that room before we were all able to go back to even look at my brother's expired body. Prayer works.
Thank you. You have a question?
Yes, hello, thank you. I've really enjoyed your testimonies and your introductions as well as the video. I am a doctoral student at UAB working in public health. My research interest is health disparities, and I totally co-sign on what you're talking about. Oh, just walk? No, I can't afford my medications. It's beyond just walking, so thank you for bringing that up. But beyond that, one of the things, you know, this being an open forum, one thing I want to ask is each of the panels, where do you see the disconnect in our community? You know, we hear about the situations in Oakland, we hear about Philadelphia, they got their things going on, great, fine, and dandy. What's missing in Birmingham? What if, I won't even say unlimited amount of money because that's not feasible, but even if we had the power, the spirit, and the motivation, where is that missing link? And then also, as I mentioned, health disparities, I kind of have selfish ambitions. What can we do in the wake of, you know, in our low income, in our low education folks, in our low income and low education communities? What can we do in here to bridge that gap so that we can help you as foot soldiers out there?
Panel?
Oh, I'll go. You know, I think part of the solution covers both questions, and that is you got to get people energized and active. You know, well, you know, I just think about every morning I, you know, call up AL.com and look at the news before I go to work. And you don't hear about what's really going on in the community. You know, the top story is going to be something about Nick Saban, whatever Nick Saban spoke on that weekend or something like that, or you know, the big sports story or something like that, but you're not hearing about, you know, the child who was shot down in Inslee, or, you know, whatever's going on. I hear about when I get to the hospital, you know, in different team meetings and all that. So I think one thing is we got to tune in more to what's actually happening in our community. I met Dr. Nelson because he and I were doing a radio show together right after Columbine, and I'll never forget that one of the comments that we got was, well, you know, Columbine was a big, horrible event. Newtown was a big, horrible event. But we got shootings that happen all the time in our communities. We don't hear about them. It's only when we got these big events. So we got to tune into that more. We got to really advocate more for hearing about this, because unless we hear about these things, you know, people, it just fades from your view, you know. So that's one thing. We got to advocate, you know. When I spoke earlier about, you know, what kills more children, cancer or homicide or suicide, part of the reason I like to bring that up is that, you know, at Children's Hospital, we got a brand new children's cancer center. Lots of promotion, lots of activity, there's walks, you know, there's all these fundraising activities and things like that, which is important. Childhood cancer is an important issue. It deserves attention, it deserves money. But if you're thinking about a public health issue, about what affects more children, where are the walks for, you know, mental health? Where are the walks for children who are living in poverty and all that? That's got to be ground roots, because it's not going to affect the legislature until there's a lot of people that push it. It's just that, in my opinion, it's just that simple. We've got to, if this is important to us, we've got to start making it known that this is an important issue.
You know, they have those walks for like to end violence, or for you know, young people that have been slain, but they're not attended the same way, like the walk earlier today was, because of the stigma that's associated with it, you know. And so kind of to go back to what you were saying about what is it that we can do to kind of move the community forward, is we have to recognize that it's ecosystemic. This all impacts all of us, right? It's not those people over there or those people in that neighborhood that it has a big impact. And to go back to what you were saying about UAB, you see these things at UAB. I used to teach a forensic psychology class at UAB, and one of the students in my class worked in the emergency room. And 9 times out of 10, there would be things that she could mention in the class that I never saw in the news, that was newsworthy to me. And so we have to change that conversation and care just as much about these things that are happening to people over in Ensley or over in Centerpoint or over there on, you know, this side of town or that side of town, to recognize that it impacts all of us and start dealing with it from that level.
Anyone else on that topic, Chief?
I would like to say that Dr. Murillo made a very important point when he said that we must start advocating more. But I have to ask this: how do you advocate something if you don't know what to advocate? We've got to be truthful. The problem is no different than it was back in 1959 when my first grade brother was in elementary school, went to the restroom, and was raped anally by an entire group of young men. 1959. The problem has not gotten any less. It's going to stem back down to telling the truth. Nobody wants to be real. Nobody wants to deal with the truth of an issue. My brother was raped. They spanked the young man on the hand. My family didn't want to talk about it because it was going to scar our family's reputation. They wanted it hush-hush. It's best to push the mental illness, the trauma, the one who's affected, into the back room and close the door, lock the key, and pretend like we're a happy family. That there's nothing going on with us. That is diabolical. We need to be able to tell the truth. And if others see us telling the truth and coming out of the closet saying, look, because I mean, we've heard all of the rhetorical speeches. Everywhere you go, we've had these forums, these panels. I've been on more than I even care to think about. And it's always putting a Band-Aid on a cancer. Sooner or later, that cancer erupts. When it erupts, everybody knows that you had the cancer. And you need to just tell the truth from the beginning. My family was hush-hush, the school was hush-hush. 1959, it's got no different today. Everybody's still living in their little sealed houses, not realizing that mine is glass, yours is glass. Sitting inside, wanting to be like the Joneses, wanting to be like somebody else's, but I don't want you to know that I have a stigma in my family. Your money does not pay for the best psychologist. My brother grew up from that incident, as Dr. Murillo was saying. This goes on to be somatic. Somatic is bodily. My brother grew up being a hypochondriac. Everything he heard was something that was affecting him. There were times he would call me late at night, before day in the morning, saying, Katie, I just feel like I'm sitting with my gun to my head like I want to blow my brains out. That's a suicide. We're dealing with something that never should have been let be slipped through the cracks. From 1959, and he died at 61 years old. From all of these somatic things that were actually hypochondriacal. Because what they do is you continue to say, it's real, and the doctors are saying, I don't see anything, I can't find anything, but it's real. So they treat something. And you keep getting treated for something that treats and then messes up something else, and it treats and messes up something else. Tell the truth, because what he died was all of the things that have been messed up And in the end, he gave up. No, he didn't put a gun to his head. But the truth will make you free. That's the word of God.
If I could just add one last thing about that, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, cancer had a huge stigma. It takes people to say or start pushing things. With the Komen race today, the one thing that organization has done beautifully is promoted their agenda.
Right.
And again, it's within my lifetime, cancer was a hush-hush thing. If you had a family member with cancer, you didn't talk about it. So there's some similarities. Obviously, there's some big differences too, but there are some similarities. So we got to be active. We got to be talking about these things and getting them out in the open.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Got another question?
Well, actually, something to tell about and then a question.
Okay.
Actually, the mental health group, we have started a child advocacy, and we have started a thing called Children's Mental Health Awareness in May. So we've started now getting to schools, putting it out there, putting it out to organizations and stuff. Gateway should have gotten something. Children's Hospital, I know, has gotten something. So this is something where we make it positive, where we use artwork as using, like who am I is our theme this year. So we're hoping kids will draw pictures of themselves and tell something about themselves. So we're doing these avenues in which we're trying to make it positive, yet we're trying to make it more statewide if we possibly can, but mostly in Jefferson County and Shelby County right now. My question, Dr. Morello, really comes to you as being a professional who's working in this. How is the professionals looking at this now about encouraging our psychologists and our physicians and everything to work with children? Because I know that's a hard thing to get them to do. And I know we have a terrible, terrible shortage right now. And I know that some of the barriers that I come across trying to get a child evaluated. So what are we doing in that field with psychologists and with psychiatrists about dealing with that shortage right now?
Yeah, I really don't have a good answer for that. I know with UAV, the medical psychology program, we kind of go in cycles. The past couple of years, we've had a lot of child interest, and which is always great to see. But then I got friends, colleagues in the geropsychology world who go like, well, we need more geropsychologists, so everybody's kind of fighting for students. Gosh, I don't know. I think some of it is as we have folks do their practica with us, if we do a good job, some of them really come out going like, wow, I think I want to switch, and that's happened before.
Yeah. Well, it's becoming, I don't think anybody, well, I think maybe most of the teachers and the educational, and I'm sure you do too, with the volume that comes in through the practice, but, I see it as really getting crucial right now because we're seeing them so young, starting out with behavioral problems that are insurmountable sometimes. And it's very difficult to work with the families because, like you said, sometimes they don't see that. And so it's very hard to convince them. And then, like, trying to get these evaluations for this number of children in a system is difficult when you have so many systems.
Well, again, this may be another area of advocacy, because one of the things that happens in terms of the number of providers that are out there to provide services, because I run across this all the time since I see folks at Children's and then they all go home across the state and sometimes the region, is we got no place to send them. So one area of advocacy is Medicaid.
Yeah.
We gotta advocate for getting Medicaid funded and funded in a way that people in the community can actually see patients. I've got colleagues who are great psychologists, very community-minded, but as a business model, they can only see X number of Medicaid patients because they lose money.
And that's my population. It's totally
Right, that's my
Medicaid.
population too. That's one of the benefits of working at UAV or in my case,
Right.
Children's. You can see the Medicaid population. But if you're in the community and you're running a small practice, you can't do it.
Yeah.
So we got to advocate for getting Medicaid and Medicare and all the rest of it. Insurance doesn't cover psychological issues, mental health issues very well.
I'm sorry, I really wanted to piggyback on that because I think about how we grew up and my mother, she was depressed, but I found out that when I got to grad school, I learned about environmental depression. She was depressed because of the conditions that she was faced with. And I recognized that who gets help, especially among young people, are those that are poor and mandated, right? Like, those that are in a therapeutic foster home because they've been removed or something has happened, or those who are rich and motivated, those who have the money and have the means and the resources to be able to call and get some help. And there's this wide gap in between, which is where my mother fell, where we fell. She could have had a little bit of help, but the stigma, set the stigma aside even of getting help, there's not any way in shape or form would she have been able to budget being able to get that support and our help for our families, and getting to experience and see amazing psychologists. I have a lot of friends, obviously in this area, and I would definitely say Dr. Nelson is one of the best. Seeing what can happen and the transformation that can take place, we do need to have more advocacy so that you get more support going to get a trainer at Lifetime Fitness, right? Than you could get trying to get a therapist. I want to change that. I want people to be able to avail themselves of these services and start to feel better. And if you see individuals feel better, you'll see families feel better. When families are better, then our communities are better. And some of these things will start to move and shift, and we'll start to see things improve in a real way.
I want to comment, because I'm the moderator. Our time is getting shorter, but I would be remiss as an African American male to not bring up a topic that's always the elephant in the room. My dad was a jazz musician, so I know about improvisation. Everything's sort of not just organized. So what I want to bring up is certainly with the Michael Brown incident in Ferguson, and I know that touched a lot of people because the media sort of throws that kind of stuff on CNN over and over and over again. And it's going to be a question for the panel, but I want to throw this out. The impact, and in the video, it talked about structural racism and institutional racism. And I know the diversity question came up, the disparities that we see, and I teach over at UAB the residents about understanding a person of an opposite culture and how to get that psychiatric history. And you would be amazed of all the stereotypes and things that they come in after even 8, sometimes 10 years of education that they bring into the room and don't see the differences. And I show a video of 2 people being treated differently purely because of their race, and we discuss it. And inevitable, people come up with all kinds of excuses of why it happened. It was economics, or this guy was dressed this way. But when we see stuff like the Michael Brown case and all that, it brings it up to the surface, and then it dies off and something else comes in. So I want to throw that out here. What do you feel like the impact in that video or in your practices of racism? I like to call it white supremacy, based on Frances Cress Welsing is a colleague of mine in DC. Institutional racism, but how does that play into this? And in sort of in honor of this place that we're in, I would be remiss not to bring that up. So I'm gonna throw it out to the panel and certainly anyone in the audience.
Well, actually, when I went to graduate school at Ohio State, I studied under Dr. Linda James Myers, and so we learned all about optical psychology and Afrocentric psychology. And I actually haven't heard anybody mention some of the things that you mentioned since I've lived in Alabama. But in California, all that, the ISIS papers, even the rat was white, all those things, like really recognizing how culture has an impact on how we, as, and in my context of mental health professionals, address and deal with people, on a daily basis, or address and deal with trauma. I'll bring it back to an example that happened in my life. I took that ACEs test that on the video they mentioned, that traumatic, how much trauma. I think, does anybody know what number is like a number? Oh my goodness, you need to go see Dr. Murillo. Did anybody know? It's like on a scale of 1 to 10, right? It's something like that. And if you have like 4 of these things, then oh my goodness, right now you shouldn't even be sitting upright because you've been through it. Well, I did this in one of those trainings like you were mentioning about trauma with some other professionals from the area, and I had an 8. So I'm hiding my score. You know what I'm saying? But if you went home with me to Dayton, there's some 7s and 8s. If you went back to, the Bay Area with me, there's some 7 and 8s that are open about it. And I do think that looking at the Michael Brown situation and the media that we got, it really opened up a conversation about, how is it that we deal with race? How is it that people look at, I brought my 2 young sons with me. They're doing very well. I'm going to feed them later. How is it that we look at these young men? We took a group of our Jack and Jill kids to a retreat out at the, I'm going to call it the 4-H Center. Would I be right? Right? Is that where we went? And the way they treated our group, one of the people treated our group, and they treated them like they were in trouble or trouble kids. But I wanted to talk to the young lady and say, I used to run a program for at-risk youth who have been previously incarcerated, a P3 program at JCCO. It doesn't matter if they're that kid or those kids. You're supposed to treat us like human beings that are here to learn something from you. But we are so used to being able to treat people differently based on who we think they are. And until we get to a completely different space about that and recognize us all as human beings, all as children of God, looking at this space that we're in, I don't think we're going to be able to move that conversation any further. The stigmas that are held by, you talk about white supremacy, some of the stigmas that are held about African American men, especially in their, their young ages. Some of those stigmas are held by, older black people that have that same fear about them. But it really comes from misunderstanding, not connecting with one another authentically, and not actually listening to these young people and getting an understanding of what they think about this world and what they think needs to be different and changed. So I'm grateful you asked that question.
Any other rest of the panel want to comment on that?
No, you answered.
Well, I think one of the value, or one of the things I really appreciate about working with students is that they keep me honest. Because I always ask pesky questions. Why did I do something this way? How did I come up with this interpretation? Because, we all have our biases, and we all grow up in a culture, and so so there's always a constant educating ourselves and trying to be better people. And I can only answer, honestly, I do the best I can to treat everybody that I see the same way. Do I succeed in that? Probably not as well as I think I do, but it's always an ongoing thing to treat everybody equally and to do the best you can for everybody. And I do think I do a pretty good job, and I think my colleagues do as well. The other thing, and again, I really appreciate my students, again, kind of helping me be, always challenging me, always keeping me thinking about what am I doing, why am I doing it, how am I coming up with the conclusions that I come to. And over the years, I've had some terrific mentors. Some of my first boss was this incredibly large white man scientist, who trained me about science and about that. I trained with men, I trained with women, I've trained with people of different races and colors. It's just, we always have to deal with we always have to be honest. That's what I appreciate about Arnie. He always brings up these really pesky questions, So it's uncomfortable, but I think it's good to be uncomfortable about some of these things, because it makes us think, and it kind of reminds us that we've come a long way, but we all still have a long way to go.
Anyone else?
Something that occurs to me in the work that I do with the kids and families, and I guess I've come across this more frequently with the family members than with the kids themselves, is immediately assuming that I could not understand, would not understand what their experience is like. And indeed, I can't understand unless someone shares it with me. And so there has to be an openness on both sides and a receptiveness on both sides in order to to really take strides forward. I feel like that I treat everyone the same, but really we can't treat everyone the same because everyone's experience is different. And the only way that we can adjust and individualize the treatment that's provided is by having, full disclosure.
Thank you.
Everyone was not born. Babies were not born white supremacists. Racism is not born in us. Hatred of our individual or fellow brothers, regardless of race, color, or creed, is not born in us. This is trained behavior. And I think the sooner that we realize that, then the impact, like with the Ferguson and the Brown baby, on our hearts will be different. Why does ISIS hate Israel? Why does ISIS send threats to America? What have we done to them to cause them to want to terrorize us or to wipe us off of the face of the earth? What has your neighbor done to you so severely? We need to go back once again to the root cause of all of this, because it's too easy to point your finger at the black man or the white man and think that you can come up with a conclusion as to how to settle white supremacist issue, black power issue, or any other kind of issue that has to do with this. Initially, it may start out in the family. We're looking at the parents. Those ISIS individuals have been trained from birth. They've been trained, and they're very good at what they do. And if we will take the time to train ourselves first, and then our children, if we will just begin to treat each other the way we're supposed to, then we can be examples, maybe for future officers that would just decide to look at the little Ferguson baby or the Brown baby and decide that I'll just shoot before I think and ask questions later. It ultimately is going to come down to an individual soul-searching, soul self-evaluation, heart change.
And I think that's what we've been talking about all day today. In regards to advocacy and all the rest, we got to understand some of these root causes, and sure, biases and prejudices and all that. Is that part of the mix? Probably so, but we got to rise above that. And because when I'm at Children's, I mean, you see, and Lois can tell you too, in terms of therapy and all that. The best way to treat post-traumatic stress disorder is to keep it from happening in the first place. Once a child or individual is on a path, it's very hard to change that path. So we got to be advocates. We got to get in early.
We have a standing question and a question on the card.
All right, thank you. I am Hope Bell. I brought my 11-year-old daughter with me today. She asked the police officer at her school this week, it's part of the GREAT program, she asked him how was sororities and fraternities different than gangs, because she knows that hazing occurs in these sororities and fraternities. Her father's an Omega, and she recently received a Future Delta band. And it's like, how are we perpetuating this trauma, and what can we do about post-traumatic stress, and how can we advocate? Because our children are watching, and they want to do the things that we've done as educated professionals by being a part of these organizations, but I don't want my daughter to be abused to be a part of an organization. Mm-hmm. So how would you comment toward trauma and being exposed to that kind of trauma?
as a member of a sorority that, pledged in college, and when we had our interview session, they asked me all my questions about my GPA and all this kind of stuff, and I told them that I wasn't going to participate in hazing, that wasn't the way that I thought that I was going to become a Delta. But I did participate in what's now known as hazing. But at the time, we didn't call it what it is. You know what I'm saying? So we did these things. We slept together. We dressed alike. We ate ate off each other's plates. We called each other big sisters. All these kinds of things that some of the stuff now we call it pledging. But I just think that as the human race, can be really sometimes pretty nasty to each other. We really need to get to a place where there's more of a culture of civility. I was bullied on a bus because my hair was short, because I was poor, because I wore the same dirty clothes every day or whatever. But now these days, I could report that, and the principal can get in trouble if he doesn't address that. I had to endure a hostile situation every time I got on the bus, every day. We didn't skip a day. Every single day I got teased on the bus. And so, what I'm hoping is that, by the time your daughter goes to college, that there'll be positive young women at the school that she attends. And if she chooses to be in a sorority, or not, but if she chooses to be in a sorority, that those women have been exposed to really positive examples of women who are trying to bring other women up, because that's what a sorority is intended to be. I mean, going back to, we talked about prevention just a minute ago, but the Center for Disease Control has a concept called veto violence. And in that veto violence, they have resources that your daughter might enjoy looking at, some of the videos and all that kind of stuff. And they use a public health model, going back to the public health student that stood up. And it really looks at, in order to have less violence, we want less people to be infected with violence. You know what I mean? Like, if you wanted less people to have a cold, you're gonna wash your hands, you're gonna not come to work if you're sick. In the same way with violence, we want less 12-year-olds and less 11-year-olds and less 10-year-olds to be exposed to violence, so that they don't bring it on the bus and bring it to school and bring it to college when it's time to be a part of a sorority. So thank you for bringing her, and thank you for that question.
Anyone else?
Yeah, one of the things that happened at Alabama last year with the sororities, I thought that was a really important event, because it took, one person to get up and say, hey, that's not right. And then it really kicked things off. And then there's the news story about the superintendent, I forgot what state, up north somewhere, who, because of some hazing in the football locker room, canceled the whole football season. So it takes, one person to say, that's not right, and to take a stand. I mean, could you imagine somebody in Alabama canceling a football season because of hazing? Oh my God, I mean, it'd be like a huge uproar. But just, it's all about advocacy and standing up for what we need to do.
It sounds like your baby has already, where you, mother? It sounds like your baby, and hello baby, already has the makings of great high self-esteem. That's good. Recently, my daughter was engaged to a young man. She told him right off the bat, she said, you see this ring that you just put on my finger? She said, I have had rings all across my fingers, and they were not artificial. She said they were real. So this ring doesn't mean anything to me. If I see something before the wedding date in you, or if God reveals something to me, this is my daughter, she's 30 years old, 30, whatever, 33 years old. and she said, and those rings, my mother, she said, you see that lady? She made sure that every year, Christmas, birthdays, I got real rings on my fingers. So she said, don't think that I'm moved by the ring, because I don't mind giving it back. She did that. Just before, I wish she had done it before all that money was spent for a wedding, but she didn't. I mean, right within 2 weeks of a wedding, she called him in and she shined his ring up very pretty and she gave it back to him. She then, after sending all those invitations out, she had to now send notices out that said, I now have recused myself. Recused myself. Well, some of them came in and read as the notice was on the computer, and they said, oh, Angel has rescued herself. Well, from his proposal. Now, you know the word recused and rescued sound alike. So, I had to tell them, no, darling, that word, look again, it is not rescued. The only person that can rescue you from anything is God. But you have the power to recuse yourself, to disqualify yourself, to say, this is not for me. And that, baby, is what my daughter did. And mother, I would like to see you raise that baby on up to the point that her esteem is so high and that she does not need to feel a part of a sorority, fraternity, group, anything. Not a fraternity, but she does not need to feel a part of anything or anybody that would threaten her, that would cause her to feel any kind of way with her spirits dampered. She doesn't need to be a part of that, and she needs to feel good about saying, I recuse myself.
Thank you.
I want to say right quick that the future's looking good with your daughter. The insight that she already has, I think she can make the change.
We got 2 more questions. And I know our time is, I'm okay, I can stay all night, so. And we need to have a part 2, I think. Is everybody in agreement? Some kind of part 2, because a lot of times you kids can't do it all in one session. First question, and we may have answered some parts of this, is how do you get a person to talk to you when they are showing signs of PTSD, especially when they are not wanting to communicate? And I think y'all answered a little bit of that, but anyone want to?
Well, yeah. So what I find is in those situations where I'm starting to see, it depends on the age, you know, so that's one factor you have to look at. But when you're able to see the symptoms, you know what they are, then you are going to reflect what you're seeing in the person and ask them to kind of identify with what you're mirroring, right? So you are taking on what it is you're seeing in them and reflecting it back and getting their impression. And during that process, they become able to see themselves a bit. Something that I think we have to work on whenever you're looking at that is the stigma that's associated with it. The idea that this means I'm weak is something that becomes a barrier for many people to get the kind of treatment that they need. So education is important, and getting them to see something that works really great is metaphors, stories about others who've gone through it that they'll be able to relate to. Stories with a positive outcome makes all the difference. So that's just.
Thank you.
When I worked
Dr.
with
Agee?
the next year after the incident happened with the anxiety, the NFL had me to come in and do screenings for depression and anxiety. So before anybody got on a plane, if Bob could prescribe something for them or get them some help, that's what we did. And so I did this assessment for depression. We had to modify it for the players because the depression screening that we have for college, or one of the screenings had something like, do you like to hit things? Do you hit things when you get mad? Do you express yourself through hitting? And it was like, okay, well, that's part of their job. That's how they're going to make millions. We had to modify the questionnaire. And so a lot of the men that came to see me, I was a part of the rotation for the physicals, the same way the eye exam was, and the Bob did the doctor thing, and then the podiatrist, everybody was there. A lot of people were a little nervous when they got to me. They didn't want to be flagged or anything like that. Well, I had a gentleman that scored high on the depression scale, so I brought him back, and he was like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me, there's nothing wrong with me. And I said, well, you know what, there may be absolutely nothing wrong with you, and I'm not saying that, and the test is, you know, I don't know you, the test doesn't know you, so, you know, you're the expert on your own experience. But something about the way you answer these questions is consistent with other people, and those people have been depressed. So I'm not calling you depressed. I'm saying you answer these questions in a way that are similar to other people who've been depressed. Is there anything, you know, that's going on with you that might be consistent with why you would answer the questions in that way? And he said, oh, you mean like that my dad died, and it had been recent. And then there was another gentleman who had signs of depression, and then he said, well, I should be over this grief, and, you know, my cousin died, but I should be over it by now. And he had a T-shirt on, and it had the date on it, and it was a March date, the March date from when he passed, but we were in April. And I was like, nah, sugar, you shouldn't be over that by now, and don't let anybody tell you that lie. So sometimes we really have to connect to people where they are. Do not label them. I noticed something about the NFL players. They don't call themselves depressed. They don't say that they're blue. Women do that, right? We can say, oh, girl, I'm depressed, I'm blue. You know, we can verbalize it in that way, but they would say things like off their game. They would come if I said I could help them sleep better or help them relieve stress. But if I said it's a depression clinic, they had a guy who was a kicker from Japan, and when they brought him in with the translator, he came up the steps. When he saw me, he started crying. And the translator said, well, you know, where he's from in his culture, he thinks you're about to fire him. Like, this is the end. They're not gonna, you know, there's no tolerance for that. So we had to completely restructure it. I wasn't even there for what I was there for in order for people to be able to come and get help. And I had coaches and everybody else that ended up coming to see me once we changed it. I'm not even here for mental health or whatever. Let's call it whatever. And that sometimes can allow people to have access to get help.
I agree. I agree. You start with a person right where they are. I agree with that. I see prisoners, thousands. We see thousands of prisoners. And in 1 month's time, it will shock you at how many, even letters that just pour in. The letters that you just really can't read them all in the setting. Usually I find myself saying to the inmates or asking this question, and I find it really works. How are we able to help you? What can we do to help you? One of the most, I think, amazing answers that I ever received was, save my daughter. And I said, what? Save my daughter. My daughter is, I understand that you all are from here in Alabama. My daughter lives here, told me where she lives, and that he had gotten reports that the daughter had gone out into the streets, that she was now a part of gangs and acting up in school, all kind of things. He gave me the school, gave me the information that I needed to get there. We were able to go and literally save his daughter. We went to that young lady. When we dealt with the young lady, which led us to the home, because we couldn't deal with her without dealing with mother first. We had to deal with the mother. And then there were 2 other young boys in the home. These people needed food. They needed clothing. They had nothing. So in our dealing with his request to go save his daughter, we were able to help to try to save an entire family, which, when we went back to the prison, this had opened up an entire avenue for us to deal with this young man. Now he feels confident and he's trusting us enough to really open up and share things that even put him in prison, and he went all the way back to his childhood, things that had traumatized him, that was causing him to act out with the post-traumatic stress disorder.
So you're saying you have to get them to the point that they can trust you to open up to you?
Absolutely. Meet them where they are.
Part of the issue, and one of the most difficult things about all this, is that sometimes you got to let things play out. You know, sometimes folks aren't ready, so you can start planting the seeds, so to speak, so that when they are ready, they have a lifeline. They got people that they can then go to. But it's kind of hard because sometimes you got to watch people make a lot of mistakes and suffer for a bit before they're ready to accept the help that's there.
And sometimes all you can do is plant the seed. But if it's a good seed and a God seed, it will grow.
Thank you. We have to cut it or conclude for today, but I do want to have a part 2. I want to, and since I'm the moderator, I'm going to throw something in here. Don't drag me off, please. In reference to Reverend McCain, I don't know if you're familiar with a study, and I present this at Gateway and a couple other places where I present. They did a study, I think it was in Boston, of people having bypass surgery for their heart. And what this doctor got them to do was he had a group pray for them. But the interesting part about it wasn't their family, and it wasn't in Boston. It was in California. They didn't know the name of the person. They knew that these people were having surgery on this day, and they were going to pray for them.
That's right.
After the surgery, the folks, and then there was a group that wasn't prayed for. So I have to throw that part of the study in too. So there was a group that, maybe the family prayed, but not a group that specifically were praying for that group. So there was a group that was not prayed for, and there was a group that was prayed for. And they were in California, so this is Boston.
Right.
At the end of the surgery, the group that was prayed for from the group in California had less infection, they recovered faster, all the things we look at as physicians to see if somebody's getting better. The group that wasn't prayed for, it was more complications, and some of them had to go back and have, other things done to them. So just to let you know, there's this other part, the spiritual part, that we tend to not talk about. And I had a question for that, but we ran out of time. But if we have a part two, I think that's very important to talk about. There's a lot of studies going on about that, and it was just and he was a cardiologist that did this study, and you can look it up online, but very, very interesting. And so I wanted to conclude on that, and I think that we need to give our panel a round of applause, and I'm going to stress a part two. Mr. Townsend?
Our moderator.
Again, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank the panel, each one of the panelists, Dr. Nelson, for your time.
Moderator.
Yes, thank you. Raising of America, these series of documentaries are going to air next year nationally. One of them is going to be the Wounded Places documentary. You guys were the first to see it in the nation. That was just a draft. That was an uncut version of a product that's not even completed yet. So you were the test product. California Newsreel allowed me to air it today because of a relationship that I had with them in 2007. Wow. And so that was just a blessing. It was just grace. And prayer does work. Yes. Prayer does change things. So there are 4 other episodes. The first one, Are We Crazy About Our Kids? It's a cost-benefit equation, and it's about poverty, and that's going to air. DNA is Our Destiny. How do we get outside? How do outside gets under our skin? Once upon a time, when our kids used to get outside, that's the other one. And the last one is Wounded Places. There's a little sheet back there that kind of gives you kind of an outline of each one of those. There's also another sheet back there that says 6 ways to raise PTSD awareness. Make sure you pick that up, because we need to continue to raise these conversations. I want to have a follow-up.
Absolutely.
There's not enough people in this room.
That's right.
We sent out emails to over 1,500 people. We blew up Facebook. We had 2 major press releases, but we can't compete with football in Alabama.
That's right.
It's hard to compete with football in Alabama.
Sad.
And it shouldn't be that way.
No.
When it comes to our children. So we're not giving up. Thank you for your time. Go home, be safe, and look forward to the next event. And again, thank you so much. So this concludes our discussion. Have a great evening. Thank you.